Alrighty. Getting set up here. There we are. Alright, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, twincitiesgeek.com, and filminquiry.com. So we're roughly about halfway through the year here. We're coming up on July, right in the middle of the movie summer season. So we got a lot to talk about today. We are going to be covering the new Yorgos Lanthimos film, Kinds of Kindness, that is opening this weekend. I'll also be talking about Inside Out 2, which is currently one of the better performing films this year, the Pixar sequel, obviously. We'll also be talking about the Bikeriders, a semi-autobiographical film on the motorcycle gangs of the 1960s. And if we have time for it, I'm also going to cover some smaller films, including the very quiet drama Janet Planet, as well as the Juliette Louis-Dreyfus grief drama, somewhat fantastical comedy called Tuesday. Both of them A24 films. Like I say, they're small, but I mean, like it's A24 is really not that small. They're comparatively smaller compared to bigger films, but yes. Thanks everyone for watching here. Daniel says hello there. How you doing, Daniel? All right, so before we get to that, I'll get up my notes here, but we'll be reviewing Kinds of Kindness is opening just today. Usually I get early reviews up more than usual, so if you'd like to see more early reviews, be sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to get the latest info on the latest films, since I do watch quite a bit of everything. All right. So we'll get to the reviews here. Although, before I forget, few bits of news here. First off, next week, starting on Thursday, I will be at Convergence Con in Minneapolis, and I'll be doing tons of panels there Thursday through Sunday. In particular, the one I'm most excited about, and that would probably be more relational to this, would probably relate more to this stream, is I will be doing a talk on autism film theory, which I've been working quite a long time on this, and I'm very excited to share that with the crowd. And I'll also be talking about movies and cartoons and neurodivergency, all that fun stuff that I usually talk about at Convergence, so if you're looking forward to that. And also, for those of you more Minnesota news there, technically this is Texas news too, but the Alamo Drafthouse in Woodbury is going to be opening up again later this summer after having shut down a few weeks ago. A lot of people might be, if you remember a few weeks ago, like a franchisee of Alamo had to shut down the Woodbury location and a whole bunch of locations around Dallas, and thankfully, like Alamo corporate jumped on the ball here, and they're going to reopen all those Alamo locations. They say they don't have a firm date when the Woodbury location is going to open up again, but I think they've implied it's going to be summer, and I don't see why they wouldn't, because I mean it's not like they tore it down or anything. Like they shut down for a few weeks, so it'll probably be up and running, which I'm happy about, because I mean, like, seeing A24 films there was night and day. We've been seeing A24 films over at the Icon, and like there's just no comparison. There really isn't. So I'm on that angle. I'm glad to have Alamo back. I know a lot of people love Alamo for a lot more else, like their menus. I love their fun pre-show stuff and other little events. So it's good that we still have the theater here. And of course, like I expected, this news was going to come after Sony took an interest in Alamo, so you know it was only a matter of time, and it was thankfully faster than I thought it would be. Okay, so let's go straight to the newest film of the week here. Let's go straight for some Yorgos Lanthimos films. Okay, let me get my notes up here and get another drink of water because I'm losing my voice fast. Which is going to make Convergence interesting. Like, I did Anime Detour earlier this year and really, really threw out my voice. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I was maintaining my voice there when I was doing lots of shouting and character with a lot of the panels. But on Sunday, like, my voice was dead. It was gravelly and it was terrible. All right. So we'll try to get through as quickly as we can. So here we go with Kinds of Kindness. A review coming in 3, 2, 1. So Yargos Lanthimos' Kinds of Kindness is a very, and I know this is going to sound, like it's Lanthimos, so to call this film weird almost seems like, like almost ubiquitous, but like it's an anthology that does go the extra mile into weirder territory here. And I think like this is kind of like Lanthimos getting back to like his weirder roots, I guess is like an easier way to say it, because it's not like I mean, coming into this film fresh off like Poor Things, I think there's like a lot of anticipation to see what Lanthimos will do next after having made that Academy Award winning film, and he doesn't disappoint. Like I would think that he might like fall back on making something a little bit more palatable, or delivering something more akin to what Poor Things ended up being, but he thankfully doesn't. I think some of that is due to the credit of what's his name, Filippo. He's a co-writer who's been on other Lanthimos films, but he returns here, and they conspire this anthology of 3 different stories, but they all have the same actors in different roles. And like the best way to describe these stories is that it's all about control and polyamorous relationships. And like it covers, there's a lot of ground covered in this film. Like there's so much that it talks about in terms of control and relationships, and death and desire and longing for love. It covers a lot here. But I think those are the most key points here. And like any Lanthimos film, it goes through the bits of being so like pitch black dark with the comedy, but also like meaningful in its drama, in the way that it like it wants you to laugh at like the weirdest stuff where you almost kind of got to wince at it. And it also wants you to like feel the sadness in there, but like the strangest stuff, and it catches you off guard. So like, I don't want to spoil too much here. I'll just give like the general idea of each one. So with each story, like the first story is called like the Death of RMF, and it's weird because like all the stories revolve around one character called RMF who doesn't play a big role in any of these stories, but the Death of RMF is basically about a character called Robert, played by Jesse Plemons, who really wants to be in a polyamorous relationship, and he's going about the motions of adhering to the whims of this guy who's in control, played by Willem Dafoe, who says, "Hey, do all this stuff, and you'll be rewarded." And he's pushed to go much further than he would expect. Like it does, as the title implies, it does involve some murder. The second story, RMF is Flying, it poses Jesse Plemons as Daniel, a cop who has recently come back into contact with his wife that he thought was lost. This wife played by Emma Stone, who plays Liz. And when Liz comes back, like Daniel's not sure that this is Liz because she's acting differently. And the more that it goes, it gets stranger and stranger and stranger. And let's just say cannibalism is on the menu here. And then finally there's RMF Eats a Sandwich, which sounds like it's like a weird title that they give for this one because RMF does the least in this. But it is it is like a little bit more of a surprising, and it's definitely the darkest one because it's all about Emma Stone playing Emily, who's working alongside Andrew, Jesse Plemons again, and they're both within a cult, and they're trying to find someone who can raise the dead. And at the same time, Emily is struggling to decide whether or not, she should keep in contact with her family that she's kind of distanced herself from. So these are all like very strange and messy stories, and I'm doing my best not to spoil the big twists of them because they hit you hard. Like there's moments where just like, you see like the drama, like slowly boiling, and like there's bits of comedy here and there. And then there'll be that moment where it catches you off guard. And and it just shocks you in the most intriguing. Like, I haven't even, like, I swear, with everything that I'm saying here about these stories, I have not revealed the biggest twist in each of them, because they get weirder and wilder as they go on. Like I said, they involve polyamorous relationships, they involve cannibalism, they involve dogs in some way, and RMF is always in the background there. So like it's I guess, like, you know, a lot of people will be describing this anthology as, you know, wild, and I guess like that's the best way to describe it, just because like all three of these shorts, they explore so much and they're all over the place, but they all feel like they have a firm focus on what is most important and what's meant to be communicated with these characters who are in these very odd situations. And I think like an even easier way to look at it is just, you know, looking at it as the stages of polyamorous relationships. So like in the first entry, and like in the Death of RMF, it's about someone desperate to get into a polyamorous relationship. Within the second entry, RMF is Flying, it's someone who's desperate to maintain a polyamorous relationship. And in the third one, RMF Eats a Sandwich, it's all about someone getting kicked out of a polyamorous relationship. So it's a very unique trilogy. Like it's not like a very, despite how weird it gets in different segments here, it's very much has a firm focus thematically on what it's trying to say. And I guess like the most important thing for those who've loved the weirdness of Poor Things, yes, this does get weird. It gets very bizarre in like ways that you wouldn't expect. Like with Poor Things, there was like a mounting weirdness to it, where the more that it kept going, you kind of got used to it after a while. And I think the anthology format that Lanthimos assembles here ensures that you don't get too comfortable. It ensures that you do not know what is going to happen next, with just like the funny titles, posing characters in different ways, and making the stories short enough so that there's enough time to just smack you over the head with with something that's just going to shock you so much that you will not be able to decide whether you're going to like laugh or wince. It all depends on how fast that your jaw can lift up from the floor when you're hit with just how bizarre these characters get. Like like I said, there's weird stuff: dancing, cannibalism, dogs, people eating sandwiches, people trying to raise the dead, people who have weird obsessions with water and purity of their bodies. It goes to some wild places, and it does get very very hard to watch at times. I'll say this: if you're not big on sex and violence, this film goes fairly hard on those angles. Like there's some pretty like wince-worthy gore, and I think just like, you know, like it takes, I've seen like a lot of violent films, so it takes a lot to, you know, make me wince. And I think like Lanthimos has like the perfect anticipation for when things do get gruesome. But at the same time, like I think like Lanthimos also knows how to shoot just absurd sex scenes, like sex scenes that will just catch you off guard a little bit. And part of that is like it's edited similar to the way that Poor Things is. Like in particular, there's one moment where the characters of a polyamorous relationship are just watching porn, and they kind of like allude to it, but then they make a hard cut to them watching a porno that they filmed themselves, and it's meant to be very like emotional and heartfelt because it's all about longing for, you know, someone that you've lost before, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's a film porno, so you kind of have to laugh at it. So it's perfect. Like it's one of those things where like I love Yargos so much because he knows how to make you care about the most absurd things and laugh at like the most uncomfortable moments. And Kinds of Kindness kind of does a lot of what Poor Things did, to a degree where I almost kind of love it more. Like I know like in terms of like a more complete narrative, I think Poor Things is great, but in terms of just exploring all the weird stuff that you could do with this stacked cast here, like I've addressed like, you know, Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons, Willem Dafoe, but also like Margaret Qualley, who kind of like almost literally jumps into some of these performances. Great supporting roles from Hong Chow, Joe Alwyn, I always screw up his name. Mamadou Athi. Fantastic cast here. Not to mention that just hiring an for RMF, it's like an unknown guy. I think like there might be like some relation to how like they have like that connecting character here. But it's all like just the cast here is fun. It's just they're all so engaged with it. They all like know the score, and they have enough faith in this material where they don't have to wink at it. Like they know that this is absurd, and they're letting Yargos Lanthimos take them for the ride here. And it works. I was just stunned at how engaged I was with each anthology entry here. Like, I guess if I had to choose, like, a weak one, because I know someone will probably ask, like, what is the weaker one here? I would probably just say, maybe the last one, like, RMF Eats a Sandwich, only because I think that, and again, like, it's almost kind of like splitting hairs here, but I almost think, like, it goes into territory that's a little too dark. That really, and I don't think it's like inappropriately dark. I think it's just like it's a darkness that really tests the limits of how willing you are to embrace this type of absurdity, because it gets into some very troubling areas in terms of what the central character of Emily goes through, where you really do feel for her, where it's almost kind of like hard to accept like the stranger twists that go on with it. But all in all, like I adore each one of these entries, and I know like immediately coming after Poor Things, a lot of people are going to say that, you know, it's not as honed or it seems like a little bit more scattershot in terms of its tone, but like but if you go into this film expecting it to catch you off guard and not knowing that much about it, which I swear I'm trying as hard as I can not to spoil some of the weirder twists here, because it really does have to be experienced with the crowd. Because even when I was in like the small critic screening, we were all just, you know, having a blast with this thing. So yeah, what more can I say? Kinds of Kindness is exactly the type of film that I'd love to see Lanthimos do more of. So yeah, even after Poor Things, he hasn't lost his touch. I love the hell out of Kinds of Kindness. So Kinds of Kindness is currently in theaters right now. You can also check out the review of Kinds of Kindness up on movieswithmark.com right now. Oh, and also another little thing I forgot to mention. Also on my website, Movies with Mark, I have installed the Just Watch app on my reviews. I haven't applied it to all of them, but most of them have it. What this is if you might have seen this on RogerEbert.com. It's basically it's a little widget that I put inside the article that will tell you immediately where you can watch it online for like streaming. So when Kinds of Kindness goes up on a streaming platform, you won't have to hunt for it. You can just go to my website, you can click on the review, and it'll immediately tell you where you can watch it. In fact, you can see a few examples of that. Like I have a few, like I did a review of the Brat Pack documentary called Brats. That's over on Hulu. I did a review of the Movie Pass documentary. It's over on Max. And I did a movie review of the Jim Henson documentary. I know, I've been watching a lot of documentaries. And that one's over on Disney Plus. So yeah, you can find out where they're streaming immediately with that little widget there. So be sure to check that out. Okay. So let's get to the other big film this week, which is Inside Out 2. Big film this week. More like big film this month. My God, what is it? I think last I checked, it's at like 800 million. So it's closing in on $1 billion fast. Which is good for Pixar, just a little bit concerning, you know, with the recent was it Pete Docter who was saying like, oh, we're gonna make you know, Pixar films more palatable for general audiences, which is a code word for no diverse opinion, no diverse viewpoints or anything like that. So, which sucks. Hopefully it won't come to that. All right. Let me get the notes up here. Pardon me. All right, and here we go with Inside Out 2 in 3, 2, 1. So Inside Out 2 is the sequel to Pixar's Inside Out, all about the inner thoughts and emotions of the tween Riley. Well, she was a tween in the first film, now in Inside Out 2, she's a teenager. So more complex emotions come with puberty for the sequel. And in terms of returning to this type of story and this setting with this type of character, I feel like Inside Out 2 finds just enough to explore with like this character development and her internal struggles to warrant to warrant like a further examination and a sequel for Riley, because in essence I think like the sequel more or less goes about the same motions as the first film, because it's a similar lesson, because it's once again Riley's inner emotion of joy, once again voiced by Amy Poehler. She needs to learn a hard lesson. She needs to learn that, with puberty coming and like these new emotions that come into the mix, like we should probably run down like the new emotions that come here. There's anxiety, voiced by Maya Hawke. There's what else we have? We have envy, voiced by Ayoa Dibri. We have what else? We have ennui, voiced by Adele Exarchopoulos. I'm gonna screw this up. Adele Exarchopoulos. I believe I'm pronouncing that. I probably butchered that, but she plays ennui or boredom. And then, of course, you have embarrassment, voiced by Paul Walter Hauser, although kind of more like Groot. Like, don't expect Hauser to have a lot of lines in this. So it's Joy learning to work with these new emotions. It's basically Joy going on the same type of journey. She has to realize that she can't micromanage everything. She can't keep up Joy, and she's got to learn to share the emotional console with anxiety. And if that were all that the film was, it would be a fairly standard sequel that didn't feel like it was exploring much and was kind of vanilla. But thankfully, I like the idea how they expand on Riley with a new system they install, which is installing a core belief system, where all those like little all those like those memory balls that like kind of like that basically clutter all the shelves of Riley. Those all the key ones get implemented into her core, basically like her core beliefs. So everything that she believes about herself, her identity, and more or less her self-esteem is established by that. And Joy feels like she can control that. So she takes like the bad memories and launches them into the distance, and takes the good ones to form Riley's core belief of like, empowerment and feeling better about herself. And of course, we all know where this is going. Joy has realized she can't do that, and if she tries to micromanage, it's going to lead to some darker places, and that happens when anxiety basically takes the wheel. So it's a more or less the same type of story as Inside Out, the first one, but it's more interesting, I think, that Joy has to set an example rather than Joy just learning the hard lesson that you can't just shove everything into the background, especially when it comes to something big like forming core beliefs. It's an understandable reaction, because like more or less, if you look at like the different emotions here, like everything from like, joy to, disgust, fear, anger, sadness, they're all mostly operating on like the same level as like a parent wanting to like micromanage and do what's best for their child. So I think having, Joy have to realize to set a better example leans into more of the parental angle, and I think that mostly works. But like, what is a bit of a disappointment is that a lot of what happens after that, where Joy gets basically launched back out into the wasteland of Riley's like changing psyche within her mind, it's mostly another adventure, except it feels like roles have been kind of swapped here. Because in this adventure, it's not just joy and sadness. Because now sadness is left behind to try to stop anxiety, while joy, fear, disgust, and anger all go to kind of like retrieve this core belief of Riley that has been tossed far, far, far into the background. And I think like, and because like the thing is like I understand why they do this, like because it does mix it up a bit. It does give Joy more of a chance to interact with these other characters. I did find it kind of interesting how like in the first draft of Inside Out, it was supposed to be joy and fear going on this adventure. So I like that it explores more of these characters who didn't get as much time while still finding like a good usage for them. The thing is, I wish there were more interesting angles to explore within Riley's developing mind. Like we do go to a few interesting areas. Like I love how there's this kind of like repressed memory prison where Riley tries to hide that she liked old cartoons or like a crush on a video game character. But if you're expecting anything akin to like what happened with the imaginary character of Bing Bong in the last film, you won't really get that here. It's more, they more or less treat it as just like a brief like pit stop. And there are a lot of those on the adventure to kind of retrieve Riley's core beliefs. And everything else, it just kind of feels like a reiterance of what happened in the first Inside Out film, but with like a different coat of paint. So in other words, like Riley's imagination is now, based on possibilities more than dreaming up different ideas and, using your creativity for something else. And it's like, I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff to explore in that changing mind, because like we get to see how the central console for the emotion is reworked for puberty. And there is some of that going on in the rest of Riley's mind. I just wish there was more of that, and that I didn't feel like just like, little stops along the way. Like there were very few moments where it felt like there was something holding them back that they had to get through and kind of like manipulate Riley's mind to progress further. There are some moments with it, like in particular, there's the scene where they have to kind of hijack Riley's emotions during her dream state, which is kind of good. I mean, there's a fairly funny bit in there. Like there's a little bit of a parody of like the 1984 Apple ad, which I don't know how many I can, like, Gen Xers are probably gonna really love that one, I guess, but yeah, like there's like just enough fun ideas I think within there, and there's enough time to explore these emotions, I think, where I think that really works. And yeah, I was kind of going along with the film mostly. It's like, okay, having all this being set at a hockey camp with like Riley trying to define herself, I think that works. And it's like, okay, this is working, and like what the emotions have to go through. Okay, this is kind of cool. Anxiety taking over too much control and not thinking that too far ahead. Okay, I see where this is going. I like where the wheels are turning. So I'm just kind of going with it. Like it's not really impressing. It wasn't impressing me as much as the first Inside Out film. But then once it got to the finale, I think it really kicked into high gear and actually made me love it a little bit more. Just because like there's that moment of realization where, both like Riley and all the emotions need to realize that her core beliefs have to like, it takes all those thoughts and all those emotions to kind of better define yourself and face that level of like humility and realize, like it takes all that, you can't just embrace one thing, and you have to learn to manage your emotions. And again, this is all telegraphed. It all lets you know where this is going and where it's going to head. But once they get to that moment where all the emotions kind of like combine and, like they're all present for Riley's like darker thoughts of like hating herself and being embarrassed and not feeling that, that she belongs or that she can maintain friendships or that she's going to be a good person. It really got to me. I got like I just got surprisingly a little bit choked up at that finale. And that honestly kind of made up for the fact that immediately following that scene, there's a moment where it's almost kind of like they give Riley a break in her own reality. Like they come to like a simpler resolve, I think, than the first Inside Out film. Like the first Inside Out film, it ended in a way that would be believable, where you don't have to say much and, like your family will be there. In this film, it's more about friendship. And I feel like maybe this is just my mindset, but like the way that like her friends kind of like come to her and kind of like recognize, when she's, feeling like the anxiety and that there's pressure on her and they're not quite sure how to react. They kind of get like this, like, almost kind of like I don't quite want to say like an after school type vibe, but they do have a way where it kind of like wraps things up a little bit too sentimentally easy, I would think. Because like I don't know, maybe it's just like my different mindset on, you know, how teenagers like this would react to these kind of like dividing lines and trying to better define themselves and recognizing when someone is going through a tough time. But the thing is, like, I think at that point in the film, I was almost kind of willing to forgive it because, you know, after everything that Riley goes through, she could use a break. And the film does end on a very, very strong moral message about learning to control your anxiety by not pushing it down, but recognizing what you can control. So it still has a lot of the good stuff that made the first Inside Out film great. It's just that it doesn't have enough. It doesn't quite have the same level of ingenuity and freshness to make it as impactful, I think, as the first film. It's still good, and it still has. I think it explores just enough material here. I like the way the characters are framed. There's some fairly funny moments. I love the mental landscape of Riley is still fun to explore. It's just that it feels like it explores just enough of that material where it feels like review from what the first one, like it's like here's all the lessons from the first film and we're applying it, you know, into being a teenager, which I think for some adults, like they're gonna like myself included, I look at this more as like a review of what the first film did, like okay, here's like just applying the lessons again. But I think for like the younger audience, like, because I mean the last Inside Out film was like 9 years ago, so few kids will probably remember that. So being able to see this film, all about trying to manage more of that part of yourself that you don't feel you can control, I think is a really important message for kids. And I think it's explored just enough in this film where I think it's a worthy sequel. It's not like great sequel, but it's not on the level of, you know, Pixar's previous sequels where it felt like there wasn't a lot more to explore here. There's just enough to explore within Inside Out 2, that I think it's a worthy sequel, and I think a lot of kids who watch it are gonna come away with a fairly good message, and I hope they're entertained. But I think for some tweens it might be a little too real, just for like the anxieties that Riley goes through and the embarrassment and the envy that she feels. But you know what, I think those kids need something hard, something that they can recognize and that isn't afraid to approach these topics head on. So yeah, I think it's a worthy sequel, and I think for the younger audience, I think it's far more beneficial. So yeah, Inside Out 2 is a pretty good sequel. So Inside Out 2 is currently playing in theaters. I don't think you'll have to rush out immediately. It'll probably be playing for a little while. I mean, there's a Despicable Me movie coming out in July, so maybe see it before then. But I mean, like, it's almost at $1 billion right now, so it's probably not going to be going anywhere for a while. I mean, like, we've already seen like like Pixar films like Elemental have had legs. Not to mention other films this year have actually done fairly well. Like with the longer runs that they've had. Like Furiosa, damn good film from this year, is still in the box office, and it's actually kind of cleared its budget now. It's slowly been getting out there, which is great because it's one of my favorite films this year. Okay, let's cover a smaller film here called The Bikeriders. Get my notes up here. All right. And here we go in 3, 2, 1. So, The Bikeriders is a semi-biographical film about bike riders, well, more precisely, biker gangs of the 1960s and going a little bit more into like the 1970s as well. It's directed by Jeff Nichols. And the thing about Bikeriders is that I don't quite want to say it's kind of like a Linklater film where it's just kind of more like you just hanging out with the characters, but Honestly, it kind of is that at times, because the biggest complaint that I know a lot of people are going to have about this film is that it meanders too much. Like it goes all over the place. It doesn't stick too closely with any characters, and some characters just kind of phase in and out, and it just kind of jumps from like event to event while trying to explore the ins and outs of this biker gang. But honestly, I kind of dug this, because like the thing is, like, I feel like having that setup gives enough room for a lot of these actors, and there are a lot of good actors in this. It gives them moments to shine in little bits and pieces here, which might frustrate some people, because like even though like there is like a bit of a core story about this Chicago biker gang kind of like losing their edge, and their grasp on what it is to be in a biker gang over the years, it kind of goes in many different directions. It doesn't make it so simple to understand. But like I said, the real draw here is just the performances, and what really anchors the film, I think, is Jodie Comer's performance as Kathy, who's basically the wife of a biker, and she is kind of like the framing device here, because she's being interviewed by Danny Lyon, played by Mike Faist, about what it is to, be married and be attracted to these bikers. And let me tell you, like, Comer's, like, this is a stacked cast in this film, and Comer's performance is definitely the highlight. Mostly because she just, like, leans in to that, like, Midwest accent. And it's equal parts, like charming and believable, where you're kind of, like, hanging on her words, because she kind of has, like, that way of just kind of, like, explaining herself while she's, doing something else. Because, like, every time she's speaking with Danny, she's always doing something. She's either, she's in the kitchen, or, she's doing laundry at the laundromat. And she just, like, has this firm grasp where it almost feels like not so much she's relaying a story as much as she's just kind of, like, gossiping the way that she does with the other wives. And I think, like, that's a great angle to approach it from, because then it makes this kind of, like, almost like scattershot story make more sense from, like, the perspective of, like, of a journalist who's tracking it down. Because, like I said, the cast here is all great for who they explore here. Like, Kathy ends up being married to Benny, played by Austin Butler, who Butler does a pretty good job kind of just playing that kind of, like, too cool to talk that much type of biker. And embodying that kind of, like, cool and quiet type of guy who does have a little bit of a creepy side. Like, like when he's initially interested in Kathy, he just kind of stares at her. In fact, he just kind of, like, hangs out at her place the whole. And when I say hang out, I mean, like, he's, like, across the street just on his motorcycle, just hanging out in front of her place. So he kind of has that creepy angle to him, but he's also, they show that he's determined about, like, being committed to the biker lifestyle. Despite, the pleas of Kathy and, like, the fights that he gets into and stuff like that, he just embraces this lifestyle. And he embraces it alongside Johnny, played by Tom Hardy, who is kind of more or less like the leader of this biker gang. And Tom Hardy, he puts on, like, a little bit of, like, an accent here that borders on comical, but I think it works for this type of film because it is very critical, I think, of how, like, these early biker gangs tried to define themselves, because they highlight that Johnny is not quite, like, all that astute on gang etiquette. Like, they show him, like, trying to emulate, like he's watching like a Marlon Brando film, like all these motorcycle movies on television, and just saying, yeah, we got to do that. That's what we got to do. And just tries to embrace it in, like, this kind of, like, business sense. When realizing that, what do we got to do? Well, we gotta show how tough we are. If someone challenges my leadership, we got to have a fight. But also they show how he's, like, a little bit of like a pushover, like he's just trying to act tough and put up that front. Like, at one point, someone in the gang challenges him about having a Wisconsin chapter of their gang. And Johnny is just like, well, I don't think we're going to do that. If you want to do it, we're going to have a fight for it. What do you want, fists or knives? And so they have a fist fight, and even though Johnny wins, and he kind of, it looks like it like kind of like bends back some fingers there. Johnny's still like, yeah, sure, you can have the Wisconsin chapter. I'm just trying to look tough. So they do kind of like pull back a little bit of the veneer on these characters. But I think that they do it in a way that feels genuine, where it's not just trying to be like a straight up satire of biker gangs. I feel like it is trying to tap into something, but also be very critical of how these gangs came to be. And the more genuine aspect, I think, is more explored with the other characters who are thrown into the mix. Like, you have Michael Shannon playing Zipco, who's a character who has very interesting opinions on calling people like pinkos and commies, which Danny thankfully takes a good interest in. It's like, well, what do you mean by like pinko and commie? And Zipco kind of just gives this roundabout way of saying, like, well, it's just, people who go off to college and they get educated and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting to get that perspective. And then you have probably a character who could just slip into this film with ease, and does, is Norman Reedus playing this California gang member called Funny Sonny. And he just slips in. Like, he just comes into town, just hangs out with the gang, saying like, hey, I'm hanging with you. And like the way that like Norman Reedus, like, he doesn't just like, slap on some leather and grow a beard. Like, he goes hard into this role. And it just works. And I think that works for like a lot of the other actors here, like with like Boyd Holbrook and Damon Harriman as all the other members. They're really good in this film, and I think it's just because like they have this ease to how they become part of like this gang. And I also love the dynamic that they have between them. Like, I love the fact that at one point when they do get approached by a rival gang, Johnny's like kind of approached them like all business, and Benny just kind of comes in charge. He doesn't even say anything. He just comes in and punches one of them to get like their big biker skirmish going, realizing that that's the way that, this is going to work. And it's one of those things where there are rules to the gang, but they're not really rules. Like, they're loose rules. And I love the way how Johnny kind of tries to semi-maintain this level of, of an organized gang, and just kind of like slowly lose more control of it as more of these like aggressive members come in, and whatever like kind of like mild rebelliousness they might have had before just becomes like full-blown violent, and characters doing executions, and just Benny and Johnny realizing that they've lost control of this gang. Like, there's nothing they can do at this point. And it's like I said, it's all over the place, but it's got great performances. Like, like Hardy is like kind of playing it up, but I think it works here because, like I said, it's being critical of this stuff. And I think it works in exploring just enough of, more with like nuance, like the shades of masculinity that gets associated with these biker gangs and how they operated. And I feel like that's a much more interesting angle to explore than just doing like a straight adaptation of because the film is based on a book by Danny Lyon, like the real life photojournalist who did cover these bikers. And I feel like it's more interesting to do with this from like kind of like this fictional perspective that's more about trying to find like the atmosphere and the underlying emotions that come with forming a biker gang, rather than just making like, like an astute observation. Not quite astute, more or less like an accurate representation of what was covered in the book. Because I feel like this is probably the best way to cover the stuff from the book. Because I think it becomes more about the themes of, men wanting to assemble a biker gang and how they kind of establish their own rules and how those rules don't really stick. I think that's more important than just like, nailing who these bikers were, and how the events happened, chronologically correct. Because like I said, they do jump around in time here from like the 60s to the 70s, and there's some pretty hard jumps here and there. But for the material that it covers here, and the performances, like, I feel like I'm repeating myself here, so I'll cut it down to this. The Bikeriders, it's a bit all over the place, but it feels like a Linklater film. And with the cast they have assembled here, they touch into some interesting aspects that are a little bit more subtle, and I think it works when they're coming out of Jodie Comer's Midwestern mouth of like trying to relay the experience of, you know, what it was being like around these bike riders and trying to tap in just a little bit inside their minds rather than just like crack open the whole shell here. And I think it's a very enticing angle to go from, because like you still get those moments of like biker fights and, you know, them, you know, having, you know, like rows with like the local police force and, you know, getting into bar fights and establishing boundaries and deciding who gets in and who gets out and how that creates more friction within the gang. Those are the moments that I think are the most powerful and that they're thankfully explored the most here, where it feels like this could be a much longer film with like a bunch of like needless exposition, and it feels like it's diced up here just well enough where it's more about like the vibe of what it's like to be with on like this biker gang, and for the most part kind of works. So Bikeriders, I think, might still be in theaters, but it'll probably be leaving soon. It's summer. Smaller films like this will just blow through, you know. Hey Scorn, let's see. I saw Bad Boys Ride or Die on Wednesday. I enjoyed it a lot. Good to hear. Good to hear. I enjoyed it a lot as well. I think, and for what it might be worth, I've never been that big of a Bad Boys franchise fan, but the fourth one actually kind of worked on me. Even though, like, I think you brought this up too. I do agree. It should have been called Bad Boys for Life. I think most people would agree with that. You know, just have the number there, you know. I mean, it's right there, you know. Okay. Now, let's cover... We got 2 more films to cover here. Alright, we're getting to the end here. Let's see, I'll try to... My voice is holding up okay. Better than last time. But I'll take it easier. Thankfully, I won't have to be that animated for this one. For Janet Planet. Alright. By the way, this is not a sci-fi film, in case anyone is wondering. So, it's a quiet coming-of-age A24 film. Alright. So here we go with Janet Planet in 3, 2, 1. So Janet Planet is a quiet, slow, coming-of-age film about the summer of 1991 for an 11-year-old. Now, right off the bat, what I have to mention about this film is that I love the fact that it doesn't have to... It doesn't lean heavily into the 1990s nostalgia for the setting. It doesn't draw that much attention to it. It's one of those things where if you just pay a little bit of attention, you can see where it's going. And I think what I love about this film is that it doesn't lean hard into that. And instead of just, you know, trying to capture that 1990s setting, it more or less tries to capture that vibe of like being a kid during that era. So for any millennials who grew up, I think like there's going to be like some underlying emotions here that you can really relate to. So the whole premise of the film is that Lacey, this 11-year-old girl played by Zoe Ziegler, is a fairly, you know, quiet girl. You know, she looks like, you know, that you know, kind of like timid type of like nerd girl. Like she's studying. She's trying to like study the piano. She doesn't get along with other kids. You know, she preferred to just stay at home with her single mother, Janet, played by Julianne Nicholson. Now, and it's a little bit easier for her to do that because her mother is an acupuncturist who works out of the home. You know, she favors a little bit of like the hippie lifestyle. So Janet is a little bit comfortable being around Lacey, especially since Lacey is very clingy to her mother. Like, she still wants to be with her mother because she feels like she can connect with her most and communicate what she can't tell anybody. Because most of the time that we spend time with, like, Lacey, she lies to people. She doesn't say that much. You know, she she prefers to keep to herself, and like her few moments of joy that she has are small and fairly like compartmentalized, where most of the time she just spends it in this kind of like quiet judging manner around other adults. And it's only when night falls and she's sleeping right next to her mom where she feels like she can have this pillow talk of saying how, she views her life as kind of like a living hell. And it's like, and at first, like, if you're just looking at it on the surface level, it doesn't look that way because, Janet and Lacey live in this very like rural, like fairly like nice house. Like it's far off in like in a fairly like I said, fairly rural area. It's like away from most places and people. There's a lot of quiet. They can relax there. But like Lacey is growing a little bit concerned because she feels like she might be losing her mother when different figures come into her life, which could be replacements for her dad. So like one example, like, and the film is told in like these 3 chapters where it's like, based on whoever comes to stay with them at the time or spends the most time out at Janet's place. So there's Wayne, who's the first person who stays with Janet, played by Will Patton. And he is Janet's boyfriend, and he has a daughter of his own. But the thing is, like, like Wayne is also like very quiet and like a little bit like that he has like that judgmental tone to him, and he has like a past that he'd rather keep locked in the past and doesn't open up as much to Janet or Lacey in a lot of the scenes. So it's one of those things where it's kind of like, you feel like Wayne is on his way out, like just passively, going out the door. And I love how like the fact like they don't touch on anything that like, overtly abusive. It's one of those things where it becomes like, where it becomes noticeable. Like, there's moments where like Wayne says that he has a headache. He prefer to keep to himself. He's like a little bit bitter. He doesn't want to engage with people. And you can sense like that relationship is coming to an end. Then Janet comes across Regina, who is an old friend that she hasn't caught up with in a while, who's also in like a bit of like the hippie movement. Like she takes drugs and she convinces like Janet to do drugs with her, and they connect a little bit on that angle. Regina is played by Sophie Okonedo, and she's fairly eccentric, and Lacey kind of likes her, and they connect fairly well. But the thing is, like, Janet isn't quite, she doesn't quite see eye to eye with Regina on everything. And not to mention, like, Regina also has like a little bit of like that flightiness to her for being within a cult. And that cult kind of comes into play a little bit more with the third person with Avi, played by Elias Kotiza, who is a theater group leader that is kind of like the most, I don't quite want to say like the most like oblivious, but he feels like he's definitely not going to be there. Like he feels like he's a little bit too comfortable with a transient lifestyle, to the point where when Avi actually does leave, it's almost kind of like inexplicable. There's almost like no reason or answer for it. Like it just happens. Like literally, like he's there one moment and then just gone the next. So yeah, that's what happens with all those men and women who come into Janet's life. But all this is seen from the perspective of Lacey, and Lacey has this very like quiet nature to her where she's still trying to define herself. She's not quite sure, what she thinks of herself and her mother and all these, it's you can sense like, she's becoming a tween. She's almost to that point of being a teenager, and it's that part of herself that's kind of learning to let her mother go. Which kind of becomes a little bit more vocal in the last scene here. But for most of the film, it's mostly just Lacey kind of trying to grapple with these thoughts in private. You see a little bit of that through her very through her silent puppet shows in her room, and how she just like hangs out in the backyard and just dozes off under tables and stuff like that. Just being trapped within that boredom and trying to grapple with these feelings and move on and realize that like that her mother is gonna is gonna grow. She's gonna find other people, and she might not find them in she might just phase in and out of different people. And it's something that Lacey has to get used to. But but I think like it's interesting to see like that those moments of joy with Lacey. Like at one point, Lacey connects with Wayne's daughter from a previous marriage, and they get along fairly well. And I think it's one of those things where it's like it's bittersweet, where like Lacey realizes this isn't gonna last, and it's like realizing that those moments of joy are not always gonna be there, and that you kind of got to deal with it. It's just like a part of growing up. And it's beautifully communicated in this film that just gets lost in like the quietness and the loneliness of her situation. They don't try to do too much to linger back to the fact that it takes place in the 1990s. Like there's bits and pieces of it that I love. Like this is the perfect type of like retro film I love, because like they strew about the little clues here and there to let you know where it takes place. Like you can see little clues of that with the stores that are in like the mall that they go to. And then it becomes very obvious where at one point, when Lacey is on the couch, like sick with anxiety, you can hear like Clarissa explains it all in the background. And that's where like, oh, the millennials like, oh, yep, I know when this takes place. Got it. They never say it, but you can see it coming a mile away. And yeah, I think for how like it's very slow paced. It's very meditative. But I think for, an 11-year-old trying to explore these feelings and trying to get used to them, I think it works having her try to learn all this stuff kind of like in more of like a contemplative manner. And it honestly works. I think, for not the, the less said, the better, I think, for this type of thing. Because a lot of kids that they just like learn this stuff internally for a lot of this stuff that is hard to grapple with. And it's one of those things where even when Lacey does communicate bluntly with her mother, she still feels like there's certain things that she can't always say, which, leads to a lot of like the lies that she tells throughout the film, which don't really feel like they're lies to cover up stuff or that she's embarrassed, but more just aspects to kind of like make her life a little bit more intriguing or interesting, or just even just like toy with the perceptions of people to see how far that she can go and what she can do in this world. So it's very much just Lacey testing out the grounds around her mother and her business called Janet Planet, hence the film's title. But yeah, I think as a coming-of-age drama, there's a lot that is addressed here without saying too much. That it's a very beautifully meditative, very beautiful, meditative, and contemplative film about growing up. So Janet Planet should be playing. I think it expanded into theaters last weekend, I think. I think so. But yeah, if you can, like, you're probably gonna have to hunt for this film, but definitely check it out. I mean, it shouldn't be too hard to find. It's an A24 film, so. But yeah, I really dug it. It's if you like your coming of age dramas, to be very quiet and meditative and have little bits of joy here and there and touch into something deeper, that film's gonna be your jam. All right. Finally, oop. Sorry, something just fell there. Okay, let's get to our final film of the stream. Tuesday. Being Tuesday on a Friday. That was the joke I was making too, is that we reviewed the movie Tuesday on a Monday. So yeah, I saw Tuesday on a Monday, then I wrote the review on the Tuesday, but then I edited it on Wednesday, and then it went out on Thursday, so that when the film came out on Friday, the film being Tuesday, that's what happened. Okay, so let me get my notes up here. And we will review Tuesday in 3, 2, 1. So Tuesday is a film all about grief. But in like a little bit of like a weirdly fantastical and somewhat contemplative manner. I think like the best way that I described Tuesday in my review is that, like it's best to describe this film in terms of like what can happen in it. So like Roger Ebert would describe that My Neighbor Totoro is a film where little kids can go into the forest and they can curl up on the belly of a big furry creature and have a little nap. Tuesday is the type of film where the Grim Reaper can be a parrot. It can come into your room and it can just hang out with you to smoke weed and listen to rap. That's what can happen in this film, because that's literally what does happen. So like the whole premise of Tuesday is that Tuesday is this young woman played by Lola Pettigrew, who she is at death's door. She's sick, she's ill, she's spent her whole time in the house. Her mother, Zora, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, is struggling to pay the bills and just, is fairly distant from her daughter and just, it's just having a tough time in life. So death is ultimately coming for Tuesday, and death comes in the form of this parrot. We see this parrot come around as like the Grim Reaper and takes the souls. But then when the parrot arrives for Tuesday, Tuesday tries to charm the parrot with a joke. Gives it a little bath, hangs out with it a bit and says, hey, can you hold off on taking my soul until like I can have some time with my mom? And the parrot kind of agrees, says like, okay, I'll give you a little bit of time, but you got to make this worth it. And it basically involves Tuesday forcing Sora to kind of like, be more open and talk about like the tougher stuff that she doesn't want to talk about, because like Zora really does want to push off like this idea that her daughter is going to die. She pushes it so far into the back of her mind that it takes on more of a literal form, that when she finds out that death is a parrot, there's no other way to say this. She eats it. She eats the Grim Reaper just so that she can spend more time with her daughter and have some time to to kind of like, do all the stuff that she feels that she couldn't do and say all the things that she felt she couldn't say. And there are hills and valleys with how Tuesday and Sora become more connected as a mother and daughter. Their relationship is, they have moments where they connect to each other, where they're, reading a magazine and having fun together and chatting. But then when Zora reveals, what has happened to the rest of the house and how she struggled for money, they have a fight about finances and why, Zora struggled for work. And, they get into like, a typical mother-daughter fight that you would expect them to have. But then, of course, like things get a little bit more fantastical because, of course, once, Zora wipes out death, of course, then there is no death in the world. And if you've seen any like those, like stuff like Family Guy or stuff like that, where they have this concept where the Grim Reaper is put out of action, someone has to take over. So Zora ends up taking over with these new like Grim Reaper powers that include her being able to grow to like the size of a giant, which I found kind of funny because like when she does that, she's able to like carry around Tuesday on her back. So there's almost this kind of like lone wolf and cub dynamic to going around killing people, which would have been funny, I think, if the film leaned into that a little bit more. I think the film works best when it's just kind of going through the motions of these fantastical elements and never really slowing down that much to explain it. Because once you do, once it does become obvious, like what is going on with death being framed as a parrot and what's happening with Zora and realizing where this is all leading to, which, yes, if you're connecting all the dots here with the plot I'm telling you, yes, it does lead to where you think it's going to lead here. And yeah, it more or less just becomes a contemplation on grief. But I feel like there's like almost like a little bit of like a not quite flightiness, but like a casual nature to the fantastical elements here, where it feels like the connection between the characters takes more precedence over the ideas that, a world where nobody can die. And I think like it gave me a little bit of that vibe from the George Miller film 3,000 Years of Longing, which is all about like a genie connecting with a woman and they form a romance. And the fantastical nature is treated with a little bit more of little bit more casually than I think it would typically be for like the like a modern like low fantasy type deal. And I think that works for this film, and I think it allows like some of like the funnier moments, like when like when Death, who is voiced by with a deep voice by Arinz Keen, just like smokes weed and starts singing along with some rap songs that he knows. Like that's some fairly cute stuff. It's like kind of digging this. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus' performance is really good here. I think she does a fairly good job of portraying this like stressed out mother who is both afraid of her daughter and saying goodbye to her daughter and feeling that anxiety and then coping with it more or less by confronting death and trying to like push it to the wayside for a while. I think that in the third act, when it becomes clear where it's going, it does get a little bit lost in the fantastical nature of it, that it's almost kind of one of those moments where I would, at least in that third act, I would almost kind of prefer that they lean into that a little bit more, because I think there might be a bit more to explore with that, with this character dynamic, where like, the mother and daughter learn a little bit more on this journey of watching other people die and getting to hear their stories. But I feel like that might balloon the film out to another hour, which I would be fine with. But I know, like, you got to keep your films a little bit more trim to get people into the theater, so I kind of understand that. It's mildly frustrating because I think there's enough interesting ideas here that are worth exploring, and I feel like it's just kind of like it's almost like a little bit too casual with it. But the performances, I think, by Pettigrew and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, they really cement this film and make you care about these characters. Not to mention, like, there's a fair amount of funny dialogue from Tuesday's nurse, played by Leah Harvey. I think there's some decent back and forth that Tuesday has with the nurse. That stuff's pretty neat. And I feel like a lot of like the potholes that this film could encounter are veered away from as narrowly as they can, even though it feels like the ideas kind of peter out in the third act and don't explore as much as they could have. That being said, as a contemplation on grief and finding a little bit of an absurd angle to go about with staging the Grim Reaper as a parrot, it's fairly meaningful, and I got engaged with it enough that even though the third act was a little bit weaker, I could forgive it, especially for the first act, which just kind of transfixed me from the start, especially for the slow reveal of Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Makes you appreciate her character all the more when she starts becoming when she becomes like a bigger figure into the frame. So yeah, so Tuesday, yeah, it's a pretty good contemplation on grief. So you might be able to find Tuesday in theaters. I think it's like I said, it's an A24 film, so you'll be able to find it eventually. But the thing is, like with most A24 films, you kind of got to find them right away because they don't like zoom straight out of the theater, All right. So, well, thank you all for stopping by, like Ignacio and Mr. Dog Sumui. Thank you for stopping by the stream here. All right. Well, we got through all of the films that we're going to cover today. So let's quickly do a recap of what we reviewed on today's stream. We reviewed Kinds of Kindness, the new Yorgos Lanthimos film, an anthology of polyamorous relationships and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff. It's got some great performances by Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Jesse Plemons, and so many other great actors. And it is Lanthimos at his most wild. If you love Poor Things, you will probably love Kinds of Kindness as well. This is absolutely my jam. We reviewed Inside Out 2, the sequel to the Pixar film Inside Out, and it finds just enough to explore with the internal struggles of the teenager Riley that I think it's a fairly worthy sequel. It was worth coming back to. I also reviewed The Bikeriders, a semi-autobiographical film about bike riders of the 1960s and 1970s, for exploring the rising of gangs and the connection that men form with each other. It meanders a little bit here and there, but I think for the performances alone, it's worth watching, as well as for subtly touching on the aspects of toxic masculinity that form these gangs in the first place. We also reviewed Janet Planet, a film about a coming-of-age kid in the early 90s. Much like the Bikeriders, it also meanders a bit here and there, although it has more of a firm continuity. But as a coming-of-age film, it's fairly quiet, and I think that's the best way to explore these fairly complex feelings for a kid just about to reach her tween years. And finally reviewed Tuesday, a meditative film on grief with a parrot playing the Grim Reaper. Fine performances from Lola Pettigrew and Juliette Louis-Dreyfus that really cement a film that kind of peters off in the final act here, but it still has some charming moments and is a fairly good contemplation on grief. So there you go. All these films pretty good. Although obviously the number one film I would recommend would be Kinds of Kindness. It's opening this weekend, so of course it makes it the easiest to see. It's Lanthimos craziness at its best. So if you want to see a film that has lots of sex and violence and gives you so many wild stories and makes great use of its actors, that is the film to see this weekend. So, what do we got coming up in the next few weeks here? Well, it's July, so we're going to have a whole bunch of other films on the horizon. Next week, I will not be streaming next week because I will actually be at Convergence, the Minneapolis convention, where I will be doing panels on movies, cartoons, neurodivergence, and talking about autism film theory. So if any of you are in Minnesota or feel like stopping by, I would love to meet you there. There are tons of people I'm going to meet there, so I love the convention so much. So I won't be streaming next week, but I will be catching up with the films that will be coming out next week, and there are a lot of them. So I'm going to be catching up with Despicable Me 4. I already have the screening lined up for that, and of course, the film I'm more excited for that week is Maxine, the sequel to both Pearl and X, which will be coming out next week. And then, of course, and depending on when I do get back to streaming here, we might end up covering a few more films, like the new Deadpool movie. And I might get around to A Quiet Place, who knows? But yeah, there's lots of stuff coming up. So if you want to stay up to date on the latest films, including when we get to fall, I do actually get award screeners, so there's tons to cover on that front. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. If you like early movie review streams like this one, I know that Kinds of Kindness just came out today, so it's not that early, but still, got it out when I could. Sometimes I do screenings that are fairly early when I can do them because we get critic embargoes and all that. Just be sure to check out this. Be sure to check out my channel. If you like to support the stream, you can go to. I have a Patreon that you can check out. But the thing is, like the Patreon, I also offer books that I've written on movie history, and I am currently writing a book on the history of Saturday morning cartoons, which, if you want an update on that, I'm currently up to the mid-1990s, so I'm very close to finishing that. So you can read chapters from that book up on the Patreon that I have if you're a member there, and if you're at the top level, you will also get a free copy of that book, which is a good deal because like the book itself, like I haven't priced it yet, but the book is going to be at least 450 pages long. It might end up being 500 depending on how much more I have left to write. So that book is going to cost at least $30. So the top tier there is like $15. So you would be getting a pretty damn good deal there. You're getting a $30 book for like $15 there. But also, I do that with like future books as well. Because once I'm done with that, there's tons of other books that I'm going to move on to, and you'll get more as they come out. And also, to preference this as well, it's not, if you sign up at that tier, it's not just for that book. Like if you sign up right now, I will give you one of the other books. And then you'll get the other one that comes out as well. So, fairly good deal. It's out there. Patreon if you're interested. I post up my writings there. If you want to read more of my reviews, you can go to movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. In fact, if you go to movieswithmark.com right now, you can look at the written reviews for all of the movies that I reviewed on today's stream. So I will catch you back in probably 2 to 3 weeks here for reviews of Despicable Me 4 and Maxine. Maxine will probably end up being the better film, but who knows? You never know what you're going to get with these films, and I'm very much looking forward to all the stuff that we got coming in the fall. The summer stuff looks all right. There's a few films I'm looking forward to, but yeah, the fall has a lot more of the films that I'm looking forward to, especially since, not to disregard this, like the other films this year, because like the films earlier this year were amazing. Like there's films I know that are going to be in my top 10 list. What I got, like Furiosa, Challengers, what else? Hundreds of Beavers, Love Lies Bleeding, Challengers, Dune Part 2, and I think Kinds of Kindness might make it on there. So that's already that's 7 great films already I've seen this year. So I'm looking forward to fall. I'm looking forward to see what can beat those films. So be sure to stay tuned. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Yeah, about 2 to 3 weeks whenever I get around to streaming. So have a good one, everybody. And if you head out to Convergence, I will see you there next week. Have a good one, everybody.